Big oil is big wind. It's not the little tiny groups like me and Bill who are funded by the fossil fuel companies. Big wind are the fossil fuel companies. So the Danish oil and natural gas is Ørsted. Stat Oil is Equinor. Stat Oil is a Norwegian oil company. British Petroleum is one of the big players in wind. Avangrid, the Spanish company, and Shell. So these are all the oil companies. Just 3 years ago, WBUR asked, can big oil wants to be big wind? Can fossil fuel companies be trusted? Now we're asking the people, or the government is asking the people to trust that fossil fuel companies are being honest about all the impacts and all of the supposed benefits that are going to come from these wind turbines. So what do we actually think? What do the companies themselves actually think and try to hide? One thing about those environmental impact statements that I didn't mention is that those are not designed to inform the public. They don't want us to read those. They're over 2,000 pages long, and they have no page numbers and no hyperlinks. They're almost used as confessional documents. Like if they tell the government all the bad things that are going to happen, then they can't be sued or blamed when bad things happen and the government goes ahead and permits the projects. So one of the things they're doing is they are building right on top of a very precious ecosystem in the ocean called Cox's Ledge. So Cox's Ledge happens to be shallow. You can tell because of the turquoise color. This is Cox's Ledge. So where are all the turbines? Oh, before I go into that. So why is Cox's Ledge important? Well, it's important to them because it's shallow and it's cheaper to build on shallow areas. It's important to us because it happens to be the winter foraging grounds for 5 endangered whale species. And it is one of the last remaining spawning grounds for southern New England cod. So where are these turbines going to be located? Right on top of Cox's Ledge. And it's not just the turbines, it's actually the inter-array cables. And one of the things that I discovered in the environmental impact statement is that these inter-array cables, which will cover hundreds of miles, are going to increase the temperature of the substrates by 18 to 36 degrees. 2 feet away from the center of the cable, you will have heated up the ground by 18 to 36 degrees. If we're worried about the ocean down in Florida by increasing by 1 degree, what will 18 to 36 degrees do? So NOAA was worried about this, and they wrote BOEM 2 letters saying that this is going to be a problem for southern New England cod. BOEM, the agency, just completely ignored their own scientists about this. So in that draft environmental impact statement that I talked about, where they sort of are confessional, they admit that the overall cumulative impact to commercial fisheries and for hire fishing or recreational fishing is going to be major adverse. Now, why does this matter? You know, fish is actually has less of a carbon footprint than any other kind of animal protein. 25% of families back in 2022 in Rhode Island were food insecure. They supplement their nutritional intake by subsistence fishing. So if we get rid of if this impacts the fishing industry, it's going to impact 25% of those families in Rhode Island who are food insecure. But it's also impacting the marine ecosystem. So last year, over 80 large whales have died. We as Green Ocean are not saying that the offshore wind companies are directly causing these deaths, but we think that there's a temporal correlation between the deaths and the offshore wind activities that needs to be investigated. We think that whenever you see a correlation, it does not mean causation, but a correlation should prompt hypotheses about what's happening. And we're being told that They don't need to ask any questions. They already know there's no scientific evidence or any connection between the offshore wind activity and the whale deaths. These whales started to die in what is called an unusual mortality event back in 2017 and 2016, right when the offshore wind companies started to do their seismic surveys in this area. So we've tried to ask questions, but we have been really quite silenced. In fact, Eco Rhode Island has been a huge problem when it comes to this, and they have gone so far as to target green oceans. One comment that they allowed to have posted on their website is that green ocean is filled with line scum. They should be tarred and feathered and run out of town on a rail. One of the things that the opponents of green oceans like to say is it's not offshore wind companies that are killing whales, it's climate change. And I just feel like it's important for people to know that whales evolved 50 million years ago when the Earth's temperature was more than 10 degrees warmer than it is today, and have spent most of their biological lives on a planet that has been warmer than it is today. So I don't think climate change per se is killing whales, but something is, or humans are. We just don't know exactly how the humans are. So this is a picture of a humpback whale. Humpback whales use sound. Sound is incredibly important to them. It's how they see, it's how they communicate. This is the sound of pile driving in the ocean. This is a whale named Faith. This whale was seen in the construction zone of South Fork Wind Station. We know for a fact that it's illegal to harm whales, but if you ask first and get a permission called an incidental harassment authorization, you're allowed to harm whales. The South Fork Wind Farm asked to get a level A harassment. So there's a level B harassment and a level A harassment. Level Bs are temporary injury, behavioral disturbance, habitat displacement. Level A harassment is permission to injure a whale to the point where the whale may die, permanently injure. The South Fork Wind Company, Orsted, asked to do this to 4 humpback whales, along with other whales. And then they claim that they have nothing to do with this whale's death. We also know that this whale was found floating right in front of a turbine foundation called AN09. Orsted gives out what they call a mariner's briefing once a week, and it tells mariners where their construction activity is happening. That same week, they gave out the email saying the red means active construction, that their active construction is going on right around AN09. So why is it that the media seems to have converged and is saying that there is no connection between these things, and anybody who's saying that we should be investigating this is somehow funded by the fossil fuel company? It's really quite daunting, and it's hard to imagine why they think that that's a reasonable stance. So we went ahead and gathered up all the information for the 9 projects off the shores of Rhode Island and Massachusetts, and found that NOAA is the agency that gives the incidental harassment authorizations. They're giving these authorizations without taking into account the cumulative impact or the cumulative number. So each project might be getting just, 7 in 1 year, like South Fork Wind, but if you add them all together, it's quite a bit. So the large number are the takes altogether, and then the smaller number are the takes that are in parentheses are the level A takes, the ones that can kill the animals. So we have level A takes, and this is just for 1 year. For dolphins and porpoises, it amounts to 480. We have 145 whales that they're allowed to harm to the point of killing, and 127 seals. This isn't a small number. These are large numbers now. And in fact, sometimes they're a big proportion of the population. Not so much the level A takes, but the North Atlantic right whale, which we know 2 to 3 have already died in just the last month or two. They don't have level A takes because that's actually is illegal. They cannot actually authorize a level A take, but they've authorized over 1,000 level B takes for a population that's only 334 species alive today. So that means each whale can be harassed to the point of a behavioral disturbance, temporary injury 3 times. But it's not just the whales and the dolphins and the porpoises and the seals. It's also human beings. So it turns out that the Coast Guard has admitted that there is going to be a loss of life, a loss of human life due to maritime accidents and the fact that they are not going to be able to conduct or perform their search and rescue operations the way they would normally perform them. And that's a bit of a problem because there's a lot of people who like to use this area, especially sailors. So these are the long distance sailing races. And these are the local sailing races. But if anybody gets into trouble, the Coast Guard is going to be limited in their ability to be able to help. So if they've been sort of keeping some of this information from us, what else have they not told us? Well, that turns out that there are 51 appendices, and the appendices have all the important information in them. And they have kept 25 out of 51 confidential, FOIA exempt. We cannot get them. We submitted a Freedom of Information Act request over a year ago and haven't heard anything. And these aren't trivial reports. These are, what are the air emissions calculations? What are the impact to historical resources? And most important in my mind is what is the economic impact from these wind farms? It's all confidential. So another thing that should give us pause and worry is the fact that they are purposely, or not purposely, they are misleading the public about various things. So if they're going to mislead the public about one thing, what else are they going to mislead the public about? Here is a visual simulation that they have actually published for the public to sort of reassure the public about what they're going to see from the beach. This is Newport, Second Beach in Newport. The turbines are 873 feet tall and are supposed to be 16 miles offshore. Well, in the written report, they admit that Newport's going to be able to see, between 400 and 600 turbines, but I didn't see very many turbines in that other simulation. Westport is going to see over 500 turbines. This is a government sanctioned simulation off of the government site that is the same distance and actually should be less visible because the humidity is higher in this instance. So these turbines are also 873 feet tall, and they're also 16 to 21 miles offshore. I can see those. I couldn't see the others. When you blow up the pictures, this is an example of a zoomed enlarged view from the one I just showed you. If you do that same enlargement to the one that Ørsted has presented to the public, this is what you see. I don't see those turbines nearly as well as I can see them here. So we were curious about that, and we started looking at various simulations, and it turns out that Ørsted submits 2 separate simulations, one to the government where they have to, be as honest as they possibly can, and one to the public where they don't want to worry the public about the visual impact. And you can see that these are very different. They're supposed to be exactly the same, and they're not. And this image is not to show you how bad the visual impact it's going to be. It's just to show you that there's a difference between these two things. And it's not just one off image or simulation. It's in almost all of them that I checked. So what about property values? People have tried to reassure us that Block Island, as a test case, has not had any impact on property values. The University of Rhode Island study that made this determination was actually looking at mainland properties and whether they were affected if they could have a teeny glimpse of the wind turbines across the top of Block Island, whether those property values are going to be affected. And they said, no, no way. Well, we wanted to check this out on our own. So we got all of the properties on Block Island that we could find that had been sold in the last 3 years and looked back and had the records available and looked back until 2012 and then compared these property values to Little Compton, because Little Compton is a very similar community to Block Island in terms of sort of the comparable amount of commercialization. So Little Compton compared to Block Island, these are assessed property values in the public record. So these are the property values they use for town or for taxes. And you can see in 2015, when the Block Island wind farm was constructed, the green line is the Block Island values, that those took a precipitous plunge and then have stayed down for the last, 7 years. Whereas Little Compton, that started out at the same value, rose a teeny bit, and then around then just started to rise because the national average has risen and has just continued to rise. This is now a huge difference between Block Island and Little Compton. But assessed property values may not be that relevant to people. It's really what does it mean in terms of resale value? So the absolute best way to assess resale value is to look at the same property and see what it went for before the turbines were constructed and what it sold for after the turbines. So we found 33 homes on Block Island that had just that characteristic. So they were sold sometime between 2000 and 2015. And then again, they were sold between 2020 and 2023. So they had both the before and the after. Then we took a group from other coastal communities that had the exact same characteristics in the 2000 to 2015 time period, and then looked to see where they were able to be sold, in the 2020 to 2023 time period. You can see that they started out exactly the same. Block Island was able to sell their homes a little bit more than what they had bought them for. But if they took a mortgage out on these homes, they were not actually able to pay off the mortgage. If you compare that to this graph, you can see that the other coastal communities that started out at the same level had a much greater return. So it turns out that the properties that sold twice on Block Island all started out with an average of over $1 million. So I'm not sure why it was the expensive ones that were selling twice, but it was. So if you decided to invest $1.3 million, which is about what the average is here, either on Block Island or in another coastal community, and this was Little Compton, Newport, Jamestown, and Middletown, you had a choice. If you did it on Block Island, you wouldn't have been able to pay off your mortgage after holding it for 15 years. If you did it in one of these other coastal communities, you would have doubled your money and tripled your money or doubled more than you paid for it. So you would have made $2 million on your $1.3 million investment. Now, if you compare what's happening to Little Compton or to Block Island to the rest of the United States, you can see it did not even keep up with the national average. And this national average isn't just coastal communities. This is like cities. Whereas other coastal communities in Rhode Island far exceeded the national average. So I don't know why people are trying to convince us that this isn't going to impact our property values. What about water pollution? I don't know how much stamina you all have because I've already talked for almost a half an hour, but I have more to say. Water pollution, I think, is a huge problem as well, because the way they lay these cables is that they use jet plows to resuspend all the sediment that has managed to accumulate 4 to 6 feet down into the ocean floor. And this is happening both out in the ocean, but also where the export cables are going. So all the way up the Seconic River, all the way up the West Passage. Well, Rhode Island has participated in the Industrial Revolution and has been dumping toxic substances into these waters for generations. It has settled there. Now we're allowing these companies to come through and resuspend all this sediment, and they have not taken a single core sample to know what's inside that sediment. The only core samples they've taken have been just 1,000 feet from the export cables land where it's landing at Quonset Point. There's a whole West Passage and there's a whole Seconic River that has toxic substances embedded in, or settled into it that we don't know anything about. And that includes lead, mercury, arsenic, and PFOAs, all of the BPAs, all of these forever chemicals. And the problem with that is not that we drink water out of the Seconic River, but we eat fish and we eat shellfish and squid and everything else that is in the Seconic River or downstream of the Seconic River. So these toxins are going to eventually get into the food chain and be bioaccumulated and concentrated in our food chain. And that's worrisome.
Lisa, I don't know if can I ask a question? Or do you
Sure.
okay.
Yeah.
One of the things I had a question on was regarding the lifespan of the wind turbines, like, and the decommissioning plan that these companies have come forth with, kind of weighing that against whatever potential impact they could have on improving the situation with climate change. That and kind of what kind of consequences would we see or benefits with electric bills for the average resident of Rhode Island, like what we might be able to expect, a positive or negative impact or neutral?
Okay. Well,
That was a lot.
those are all good questions and they're interrelated. So I
Okay.
want to tell you that the government itself says overall, it is anticipated that there will be no collective impact on global warming as a result of offshore wind projects, including the proposed action. So nowhere in any of the documents that I have read have they ever definitively been able to say that it's going to decrease carbon dioxide, wean us off fossil fuels, or help climate change. They have only said that it was going to meet state mandates for renewable energy. Occasionally they'll say we expect, or that might, or it may have a positive impact, but never does it say it will, and never do they give any references for any of those claims. And so there's a really big question in my mind. When we were going through the COVID pandemic, the pharma companies that developed the vaccines weren't just allowed to say it's a vaccine, so it's going to help, and don't worry about the impacts or the side effects. They had to actually do studies with real data, real world studies that were placebo controlled that showed, yes, the vaccines were going to cause a benefit, and here are the side effects. And those side effects, given the benefits, are going to be, we can tolerate that. But this is a really different situation. We have no evidence, none, empirical evidence that shows that these are going to help. And Denmark, the big poster child for offshore wind, just announced that it's going to build 20 new nuclear reactors because it's not working for them. So Sweden's decided to go nuclear. It's not working for them. Germany is taking down wind farms, and actually, one, they've had to burn coal, and two, they're also trying to figure out what to do. So we don't have the evidence to say that it's going to benefit. So in terms of the economy, will it help the economy? Even in those impact statements where they have to be confessional, they say it's going to have a major adverse impact on employment and on economics. So I think energy and electricity is almost a human right now. People can't choose whether or not they use electricity. They still need to charge up their computers. They need to have fans or electricity or air conditioning. So this is from the Department of Energy, and it shows that offshore wind is the most expensive kind of electricity to produce, the most expensive kind. So we can expect that our electricity rates are going to go up. And in fact, Mads Nipper, the CEO of Ørsted, says it's inevitable that consumers will have to pay more for renewable energy. So I don't think anybody is arguing that this is going to cost us money, both at the ratepayer, but also we're paying 70% of the construction costs, and these are not cheap to construct. The South Fork Wind Project, I think, ended up costing over $150 million per turbine. But to get to your point about decommissioning, who's going to pay for it? So these projects are turned into LLCs as soon as they go into the ground. So the deep pocket, you know, oil and gas companies that are doing the construction and getting 70% of the cost paid for, then turn these into limited liability companies where they have no assets other than the turbines themselves. These are not the blades are not recyclable. They go into landfills, and the government is trying to make it so they no longer have to give any financial assurance up front for the decommissioning. So they want to eliminate the supplemental financial assurance that they would normally require. So renewables have not made a dent in our fossil fuel use in 2022, and that did not take into account that China is using more coal because China was in lockdown during this period. People all over the world recognize that carbon emissions are up. And as I said, in Germany, it's having to turn to coal because even though they have 200% of the electricity capacity that they need to run their country in renewables, when Russia turned off the natural gas line, Germany had to turn to coal. So Germany is now dismantling wind farms. And this is a slide I just added in to show that this is where Rhode Island is in terms of all the other states. And this is Massachusetts. We're in the bottom 50% of emitters. Texas right here is the worst emitter. They have 37 gigawatts of wind. The other point I like to make is that if people are really worried about climate change, and we feel like there is a window of opportunity to actually do something that might change and make a difference, then offshore wind is the last thing we should be doing because the construction of offshore wind has a huge emissions cost and carbon cost. If you count the construction of steel in China, the concrete in China, the transportation with diesel ships all the way over, all of those things. Don't even count all of those. Just count the emissions that are happening in Massachusetts and Rhode Island. They have to take out a special permit from the EPA for all of the emissions because they're going to pollute way over the standard of what they're allowed. So this and global warming is not a local problem. It's a global problem. And so, we're shifting things to China and we're polluting here, and it doesn't make a lot of sense. And the implications could be quite devastating. We know that offshore wind takes kinetic energy out of the air and turns it into electricity. Well, that wind does a lot for our planet. It pushes the Gulf Stream. It desalinates the warm water so that it becomes heavy and drops before it gets to the polar ice caps. It allows for plankton. It allows for what they call the Atlantic overturning circulation, which allows for all of the nutrients to be turned. We don't know what's going to happen if we change this. So BOEM, the agency, asked for somebody to study this. The conclusions were that it will reduce wave height, it will reduce wind and currents, and it will alter the temperature stratification in the ocean. But all they looked at was whether or not it was going to affect the settlement of fish larvae. They didn't look at the Gulf Stream or the overturning circulation or any of the larger problems. And this is a global problem. And so we need to we need to know more before we want to take some of these risks, especially since offshore wind is not the only option. We have other options out there, and other people are starting to do realize that maybe we need to start looking at other options like small scale nuclear. So, uh, so Green Oceans is encourages everyone to ask questions of of their politicians, demand answers, and act now. So one thing that I have been recommending is that there's a great book by an Obama appointee named Stephen Koonin, who was a Caltech provost, a physicist who is now on the faculty of NYU, who wrote a really good book called Unsettled, saying climate science is not as settled as people think. And there is a problem when scientists and newspapers start going from informing people to trying to persuade people. And so we're in a situation right now where people are trying to persuade us that we have to act, we have to do things quickly, and we have to sacrifice the ocean because it's the only way. And I think people should read this book and really sit back and make their own decisions, because I think we're all better, and every average American citizen is better at making a decision if they have all the information than the politicians and the people who might be biased about it. So I'll end you with keep it wild. And if you are concerned about Cox's Ledge and want to keep offshore wind off Cox's Ledge, we have a petition on our website where you can sign it, and then we'll have, signatures that we can go to politicians with.
Please, so what are, I know you'd mentioned the petition and all of that, and I had directed people to that website, and I've had so many conversations in the past 7 weeks since the whale showed up by my house. And it really seems to me like a lot of Rhode Islanders are feeling like, yeah, there's a lot of questions we have, and something doesn't seem right about this. And I didn't know the scale of the thousands of windmills. I thought there were 5, and I didn't know they only did
Yeah.
15 years, and then they turn to junk, and then who cleans all that up? What can we do? Like if someone, just a resident of Rhode Island, wants to say, I want to email my politicians, what's the best avenue for that? Because I've tried the House Environmental Committee. I think there's like 20 reps on that. The governor, Magaziner, White House, all of them. I haven't heard back. One of them's office got back to me. But the House Environment Committee seems to me like that would be a place to voice concerns to. Is there some way you can direct us into, like, if we want to keep writing politicians and let them know that we're concerned? New Jersey seems to have more of a voice, and their representatives are speaking out against it, whereas Rhode Island, that seems to be absent.
Well, it's a good question, and I'm glad you asked it. But I too share a little bit of pessimism about that. In fact, we started out, I naively thought, oh, I'll just tell the politicians all the bad things that I've discovered, and they'll just agree with me and think, oh gosh, we shouldn't be doing this. Well, something's happening. I don't know exactly what, but they're not very open-minded about it. And so we've had to resort, and it wasn't our first choice, but we've had to resort to legal action. So we have 2 cases, one at the state level, which unfortunately just got dismissed on a technicality, but we're going to appeal that in the Supreme Court, and a federal one. And the interesting thing about the federal case is that we are not suing Ørsted, the developer of the wind farm. We're suing BOEM, NOAA, the Army Corps of Engineers for permitting these projects when they shouldn't have, based on the dangers that they even admit about the marine ecosystem. And we just learned a week ago that BOEM and NOAA recognized back in November that their biological opinion was inadequate and threw out the biological opinion. So the biological opinion is necessary for them to legally permit the projects. So back in November, they threw out the biological opinion and said, we have to get a new biological opinion. They didn't tell our lawyers until last week. And they said in the letter that they showed us to the lawyers, it says that Ørsted should not be doing anything that would damage the marine ecosystem during the time until the new biological opinion comes out. Well, Orsted has been putting down scour protection, which is big, like concrete slabs and things like that, in like football-sized fields for every turbine, and it's been moving these big boulders that the glaciers, 10,000 years ago, left behind. So they've been permanently altering Cox's Ledge since November, even though they knew that that biological opinion was invalid. So I actually think that, we do have a separation of powers. I do hope that the judicial system will come through. I'm not sure the state judicial system is going to come through for us, but I'm really hoping that the federal judicial system will come through. And I think as Rhode Islanders, that might be our best bet. But I think signing the petition and hassling politicians is also good. I would say Peter Nerona is the person to hassle, because Peter Nerona is our attorney general, and I can. Okay. Bill, do you think we can give out his email?
Not right now, no. But he does seem to have a slight soft spot for us. And I think if he could be honest, he would say he's on our side, because he is a man of the people and the underdog. And I think we had a meeting with him a couple of months ago and spent an hour and a half with him, showing him the slides and explaining offshore wind to him, which at the time he admitted that he knew next to nothing about. And this was only 2 months ago.
Wow.
So hopefully he's boned up on it a bit, but
I think too, one of the biggest questions, I had mentioned that decommissioning, that is the biggest, I think, issue for me out of all of them. When I think of so say the windmills, and I believe that 12 have already gone up on Cox's Ledge, say the thousands go up, and whatever kind of impact they have on the environment, it is kind of grim as it sounds. And then all of a sudden, after 10 or 15 years, they're no longer even useful. Then are these Rhode Island, are these taxpayers? Are we cleaning these up? I mean, never mind the environmental, issue of kind of junkyard of the ocean, but who pays for it? I mean, is it Orsted?
No, they don't have any legal liability anymore. And it's not going to be cheap. Some people say it's as expensive to decommission as it is to install. And if you think there are 1,000 turbines and each one of them costs $150 million, that means it would be $150 billion to get rid of 1,000 turbines off our coast.
And we don't know who would do that.
No, it would be us. And the problem is, and here's another problem. So the ratepayers would be the ratepayers who signed the contract. So that would be New York State, and they've been told they don't have to see them. They get the energy, but they don't have to see them. That's the party line in New York. Connecticut, the same thing. So Connecticut, New York, and Massachusetts. So it's Rhode Island that's going to care. But even if Rhode Island wanted to spend $150 billion to get rid of them, they're not even ours, because all the electricity is going to other states. So I think we'd be in a real pickle. I think this potentially could turn Rhode Island into Detroit.
there's some people with questions.
Put your hands up on the down below if you want to. I don't know if people know how to do that, but there's something called reactions at the bottom of your screen. But I can see Wendy. You don't look like a Wendy, but a Wendy is asking a question. Oh, yeah, unmute yourself.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry. I had it on the wrong mode, but I've been involved directly and indirectly with the wind farms right from the very beginning. Block Island, I was on a vessel that did acoustic survey out there during pile driving. We watched the debacle of them trying to drive piles from a barge that was on anchors, and they finally got that straightened out by bringing in a lift unit, and consequently they were able to complete the pile driving safely without killing anybody. But And I've been fisheries liaison officer on board the Ocean Researcher for Orsted. The first surveys they did with that ship were in the fall, and then they restarted the surveys the following spring, and I went on the first startup of those spring surveys, primarily surveying the area for the proposed cable path from south of Martha's Vineyard farm area to up into well, we couldn't go inside of 3 miles because of foreign registry and so on and so forth. But the cable path survey initially, then on the actual wind farm sites. I also see on the Dina Polaris, which was doing core samples on the site off New York, Sandy Hook for Equinor. So I've been involved in it, but
Wow.
And I've been to meetings as a former commercial fisherman, as a water rat. I have a license, Coast Guard license to run tugboats. So I've been involved one way or the other with the marine environment basically all my life. My biggest concern, and I have asked this question at meetings and never gotten any form of a valid answer, and I feel it's the 1,000-pound gorilla in the room, is EMF from the cable.
Oh.
And you brought up the thermal aspect of contamination impact to the ocean. But to me, and I very basic comparison to a dog fence. People put buried dog fence in their yards to contain their pets. I feel that the EMF, which we hear so nothing about, could very well be the dog fence that is going to completely just have total disruption of the environment where these wind farms are going to be built.
Well, I would love to know more information about that because I share your concern about the EMFs. I worked in magnetic resonance imaging for most of my career, where you have big magnets, and that's essentially what these direct currents or cables are. They create a lot of EMFs. And I don't think people know. So one of the problems is EMFs are different based on what direction the cables are laid in terms of whether they're going with the Earth's magnetic field or away or, perpendicular to it. And I discovered one thing which was concerning, which was that they're making, again, it's using models. So they're making these assumptions about the EMFs completely based on a model of the South Fork wind turbines, which is a 12 turbines with an export cable that goes basically east to west. And so I don't think they understand that all of these they probably understand, but maybe the people who are actually, evaluating the projects don't seem to understand the worry of these cables that are going to be going so this is the South Fork one that they used as the basis of their model, whereas these cables are going to be going in almost perpendicular. So the EMFs that they're going to release are going to be very different from the South Forks, and they're not giving us a proper answer as to what that could cause, what sorts of problems that could cause. Sorry, I'm sort of flipping around here and making everyone sick to their stomach. But EMFs affect all migratory species. So turtles, squid, shark. No, squid aren't migratory. But basically, the two things that more primitive marine mammals use are EMFs and sound to navigate, to avoid predators, to find their food. And so EMFs are a problem. They're also a problem for humans because we have insulin pumps. We have shunts in people's brains for hydrocephalus. We have all sorts of medical devices can be disrupted by EMFs. And, the turtles can be disrupted by EMFs, squid can be disrupted by EMFs. There was one study out of Scotland that showed that congenital malformations occur in lobsters that are exposed to EMF, and those malformations can cause, a survival issue. So it could cause extinction for lobsters. I mean, I know when I was pregnant and I worked in the MRI facility, I requested from my department chair to get an office that was really far away from the magnet because I didn't want my I didn't want to expose my unborn child to the EMFs. People aren't even going to know where these things are necessarily, and they're going to be buried just 4 to 6 feet below the surface of the road. So, people whose these cables are going through their communities. Horseneck Beach is going to be one of them. The Seconic River, the West Passage. They're not going to even they're not even like the overhead things because they're going to be so close to where you can walk on a beach. I don't know. I think it's a big problem, and it's not one that we have adequate answers to. And thank you for bringing it up. And if you
Right.
know anything more, I'd love more because we're trying to make a trifold pamphlet that talks about the EMFs. And they're also very annoying. They give all the information in like milligauss as opposed to Teslas and things. So it's hard to calculate everything. And I don't think they know.
Yeah, I think that a lot of the papers, Norman Doe Associates did a paper for Bohm on EMF. And they're a survey group out of New Hampshire, and they do environmental work. But Bohm funded the
Right.
paper, so any impartiality is out the window.
Right.
They're going to drink the Kool-Aid on that one. But I think, from what I gather and just what little bit I've looked at, I think the studies have pretty much been done in lab conditions.
Right.
In a very small environment relative to the cable paths and
Or modeled. Yeah.
right. And it's lab science and it's theoretical, but
Right.
reality is an entirely different thing. And I don't know, I really don't know if there's been any studies done overseas on the British wind farms or the Danish farms or anything like that. But there again, it's kind of a catch-22 because how do you realistically measure EMF on a wind farm until the cabling is in place and the wind
Right.
farm is up to speed? And by then it's too late.
I know. That's what disturbs me. And that's what their answer to everything is. Well, we'll monitor it as we go. Well, once a species is driven to extinction, we can't really get it back. And once we destroy, the ocean, it's going to be hard to figure out how to get it back. So I think it's a problem.
Yeah, I think we've come to a fork in the road on this, and if we take the wrong turn, it could have devastating impact on the ocean environment.
I agree.
The people on the Cape who are already dealing with the EMF issue, because of Vineyard Wind, the cables are coming in on Covell's Beach and near Barnstable, I guess. And so those cables are already there, but they only have, I don't know how many turbines up, 5 at this point. 5
Well,
Yeah.
yeah,
but their citizens are measuring the EMF and they're higher than what is acceptable. And then they're also negotiating with Avangrid for what kind of sign that is required at the beach to alert people as to what kind of exposure they're getting.
they already had the Block Island cable washout
Yeah.
Right.
due to poor initial installation.
Mhm.
So that's one situation that's really got to be addressed because of storm wash and surf and so on and so forth. It's just there are so many questions, and I've been around it. I've sailed on the survey ships. I did the acoustic work on Block Island when they were or supported that work. with a vessel, and we're just not getting any valid answers, in my opinion, on the impact, on the true impact. Thermal, electrical, acoustic, from turbine noise and transmission of vibrations down through the tower, into the pilings, into the seabed, et cetera, et cetera.
I completely agree. And I would add to that, that we also aren't getting any valid answers about the benefits either.
Right. That's another thing that I'd like to just mention briefly, and then that's it for me. But has, through freedom of information, or is there, I was told that the actual power produced by the Block Island farm, that we would never see those numbers on what's actually been created by that wind farm, by the 5 turbines, because it was considered proprietary. Do you know anything about that? Is there any way of accessing the actual production of that 5 turbine farm?
Well, it's very interesting you ask that, because one of the misconceptions that the developers and the politicians have allowed to perpetuate is the idea that Block Island is receiving electricity from those wind farms. They are not. So the only way they were able to turn off their electrical generators was when the shore to sea cable, or sea to shore cable, was finally installed. So the Block Island wind farm only goes to the grid, and then the electricity comes back to Block Island. So there's a database called the Department of Energy's Energy Administration Information Administration. I think that's what it is, EIA. And they produce what they call estimates of the energy and the emissions. But I don't trust that database, because I was looking through it thinking it was actual real data, and realized it was estimates when I found that all of the biomass and wood plants had 0 emissions. And I'm like, how is that possible? You know, you can't burn wood and not produce carbon dioxide. That defies the law of thermodynamics. So I actually ended up writing them and emailing them and asking them, you know, what's going on with that? You're going to cause, you know, high school kids to flunk their AP chemistry tests. And they never got a good answer. I never got a good answer back from that. So I don't know if you can trust any of the data that is coming out of there.
I don't see how you could do it unless you could tap into their actual computer network that monitors the real activity, not the theoretical or estimate. And the other thing, Lisa, is that the turbines require power, electricity from shore, for initiation of the electrical aspect of the generation of, and there's an electrical requirement for heating of the lubricating oils, etc. So it's not a free lunch.
No.
It requires shore for initialization of the production of the electricity.
No, it's not green and it's not clean.
Right.
And I could bore you guys for another 2 hours, you know, listing all the ways in which it's not green and it's not clean. I mean, even if you just take into account that each blade is made from balsa wood, that balsa wood is harvested in South America. That balsa wood, you know, is destroying, you know, forests down in South America. They have to transport it. They impregnate it with epoxies that have BPAs. Then when you have turbulent winds, microplastics and BPAs come off of those, the leading edge, it's called leading edge erosion, and then gets into the ocean and then gets into the food supply. I mean, the number of problems is enormous. And each turbine, I think, has 600 gallons of diesel fuel just to help it go on and off. So, you know, there's a potential of, if a hurricane comes through and we lose the turbines, we could have an oil spill on our hands. Then there's SF6, which is sulfohexafluoride, which every single one of these turbines has in it. The turbines themselves don't have that much in it, but the substations have a huge amount in it. And that chemical is 23,500 times more potent as a greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. So, if a substation blows, we're in real trouble. And Scotland has outlawed that, but the US has not. So that's a problem. I mean, I could just go on and on. The substations themselves, they bring in 8 to 10 million gallons of fresh water or clean, ocean water. They put chlorine in it. They heat it up to 90 degrees Fahrenheit, and then they discharge it back into the ocean. This is used to cool the alternating currents that come in and get transformed into the direct current cables. And so if we have one farm, South Coast, has 5 of these. So that's 50 million gallons of ocean water a day getting chlorinated and getting heated up and killing everything that gets sucked up into it, including plankton, including small crustaceans, including, all the fish eggs. So billions and billions of fish eggs.
Not to mention the thermal plume.
Right. Right.
Same as a nuclear power plant, same as Millstone, with the cooling water going in at ambient, coming out at ambient plus.
Right. But we're talking a lot for a very small amount of electricity,
Right.
So.
Lisa,
thank you.
Thank
we
you.
need you to join Green Oceans.
There's a question from Michelle, and I think this is kind of something I had thought of early on. I was like, well, the University of Rhode Island must be a great resource to support this. And I don't know if you can see her question, Lisa, up there.
Is it in the chat?
It is. I can read it to you. It's, what's the position of the URI Graduate School of Oceanography? Have they done any studies to corroborate yours?
Well, we've been very disappointed in URI. They unfortunately have gotten a lot of money from Ørsted and from BOEM and from the Department of Energy to support these projects. And so they have not actually been an unbiased participant in the debate about these. So it's been really disappointing because we thought that URI would be a great resource. However, we have in our executive committee a guy who is on the board of trustees of URI, and he graduated from URI, and he is he's a very strong supporter of Green Oceans, and he has been trying to influence the president of the oceanography department to try to let her realize that this is probably the biggest change that Rhode Island will ever see in terms of how it's going to affect each one of our lives. And URI needs to take a more citizens-based approach to this.
I did reach out to the head of the Energy Literacy Initiative there with some questions, and I did not receive a response.
I'm not surprised.
Acknowledgement. And I actually know the woman. So,
oh my God.
That just was very telling to me. Maybe the email didn't go through, but yeah, no, it just, I did a lot of digging on their website, and they're very much promoting offshore wind. So
no, they are. Yeah. And they're definitely taking the stance that, oh, well, we're going to monitor as we go. And one of the disappointing things to me, because I actually started out being relatively supportive of offshore wind until, of course, I found out about what the details were, because I was naive and, I'm a Democrat, and I just thought, oh my God, well, of course it has to be right. But, the Block Island farm was supposed to be our test case. And so they had an opportunity there to actually do some real studies, and they didn't do them. They could have really tried to figure out what some of the impacts were going to be. Of course, it's not on Cox's Ledge, and it's 5, it's not 1,000. So there are a lot of differences, but we could have some idea of what was going on. Even their property value paper was just so biased and so poorly constructed. And, there's just that it's been disappointing. Because, but again, I think, I think part of the problem is I think people aren't trying to do the wrong thing. I think they're trying to do the right thing. They're just being misled by the fact that nobody is really asking the question of, will this even benefit climate change? And then, there's a lot of money in this. The Inflation Reduction Act has devoted $500 billion to these kinds of projects. And I think 350 billion of that 500 billion is going to offshore wind. That's a lot of money, so it's hard to combat all that.
Just
But
going
the
back
little
to
people can. Oh, sorry, Bill, go on.
back to the Graduate School of Oceanography. Our friend who's heavily involved with them has said that he's been appalled by the fact that all of these oceanography students and professors know very little about the grid itself. They know a lot about oceanography, obviously, but for them to weigh in and promote offshore wind, it's kind of disingenuous and ignorant on their part to weigh in on it when they don't really understand how the grid works and how the turbines actually work. And he's just been floored by that. And more recently, I think last week, one of our core members gave a presentation to a group of realtors, and also presenting were two, I guess, professors from the school. And they knew absolutely nothing about what they were talking about. Everything was just platitudes about climate change and no specifics. So
I think that it speaks to people's fear, because people, right, like you said, Lisa, people want to do the right thing. And so the general public, the general population of Rhode Island residents think, okay, well, whatever's best for the environment. And they're not, as well informed about all the details that you've shared today. So I do think it is a lot about just passing this information along and having people ask questions. Yeah.
well, and we're I'm interrupting.
No, go ahead.
And we're constantly being told, to panic because of climate change, rightly or wrongly. But, that's what they use to excuse everything, is whatever the damages are going to be from installing 1,000 turbines in Rhode Island Sound, the damage from climate change is going to be a lot worse, So if we harm the right whales, drive them closer to extinction, well, if we don't do anything, climate change is going to do it faster. It's always climate change. They cloak everything with climate change. And this is trivial perhaps, but as we all know, this past month has been horrible weather. It's been colder than usual. Like the forsythia is just blooming now, which normally is a month ago that it would have been blooming. But you don't see in the papers them saying, well, climate change is cooling down New England, or if we were having record heat right now, they'd be saying it's climate change. I know that probably didn't make any sense at all. I think there was
It does make sense. I think reading Unsettled will answer some of those questions about the fact that the press and scientists are trying to persuade, they're not trying to inform. And what we need are people to inform us about what's really going on. And I have been very disappointed, not just in Rhode Island, the University of Rhode Island, but in Brown. And I don't know how much you all know about this, but there's a sociology professor at Brown who's funded primarily by Wall Street, who got his undergraduate class to write a term paper on green oceans, and self-published the term paper stating that green oceans disseminates misinformation and cherry picks and relies on false experts and mistakes correlation for causation. And it's just a litany of really slanderous accusations that he self-published without any editorial oversight. And he has a small little disclaimer saying this doesn't necessarily reflect Brown University's position, but it's been taken up by the press and used as evidence for the fact that any questions that we bring up or any facts that we are trying to tell people are misinformation. in the paper itself, it won't tell us what the misinformation is. So it's like being told you're a bad person, but nobody will give you any facts so you can correct it. And we honestly want to inform people. We don't want to persuade or tell people the wrong things. We want to be as factually correct as we possibly can. So we'd actually welcome an honest criticism, but that's not what they're interested in doing. They're interested in just vilifying and silencing us. Because I think they realize that with real information, people are going to come to a very different conclusion. And for whatever reason, they think that either they think they know best and are just pushing this through blindly, or they have some other, bias or agenda at heart, which I don't understand. But anyway, I think they know best. I think that's the problem.
Also, it's been politicized, so I think if you fall on the liberal side of things, then it's just reflexive to support offshore wind and renewables without questioning it. And then, as soon as the other side starts pushing back against it, then you dig in even more deeply,
and I think that Bill and I, yeah, and Bill and I are a real problem for them because we're both Democrats, we're both liberal, we both have supported progressive causes in our life. So, like, they do not know what to do with us, and so they're trying to silence us. Are there any other questions? We've gone pretty long, actually. I'm appreciative for everyone tuning in for this long. So, oh.
Is Ed going again?
Lynn, can you tell him to unmute himself? Oh, there we go.
Has there been any discussion about potential exposure to terrorist attack or sabotage to ensure the security of anything discussed about security of the unmanned wind farm that is located that far offshore?
Well, there's some congressmen, Republican congressmen, who have asked about that. They did a debate down in Maryland, I think, about it. And a lot of information came out that was quite worrisome. And that, we know that these will disrupt the radar that vessels use, but it will also disrupt the radar that we use to evaluate whether there are any incoming threats to our coast. And so, and the masking of the noise will also mask acoustically our ability to detect things. So this is actually a national security threat, and it's a national security threat that people are, again, being unwilling to acknowledge. They're not talking about that. They're not talking about the threat to whales. They're not talking about the threat of EMFs. They're not talking about the decommissioning. It's really been, we know this is right and we're shoving this down your throats. Or, these are all fossil fuel companies and they're pushing this. And it's hard. I know this sounds a little crazy, but it's hard not to believe that they know it's not going to decrease our dependence on fossil fuels, or else they wouldn't be pushing it so hard. I don't know. They've got us panicked, and we're doing things that aren't smart. So when people are panicked, they don't make good decisions, and they are stoking the panic so that we feel like we don't have time to evaluate it, but we do. We do have time. If we're going to pollute to the point where they have to actually take out special permits from the EPA, we have time to make some new, level 4 modular nuclear plants, or to put in a different kind of, or, to get different kinds of solar panels or something. I personally am a nuclear, after studying all this, I'm a big proponent of our new modular nuclear, and we might even have time to wait for fusion. We don't have to do this right now. We don't have to kill the ocean right now.
Lisa, some people are asking if there was a recording. I don't believe this was recorded.
Oh, I should have
Um,
recorded it. I'm so sorry.
I want, is
Ah,
there anything that you do have that's kind of like, if you do a presentation like for another group, is it something that we can share? Because I think a lot of people I know that couldn't attend or did attend and want to share it with friends might be interested in that.
we have a lot of stuff like that. So if you
Okay.
go to our website, which is green-oceans.org, you can see a presentation. You can download our white paper, which is a 32-page research paper that Bill and I wrote that has, 200 peer-reviewed references and references from government documents. You can see a presentation that another member of ours, Martin, did. That's not, you don't see his face, but it's slides that he walks through. We have just a lot of information. We have all of our op-ed pieces that we've written. We have a little update about our lawsuits. So that website is a bit of a mess because there's so much information in there. You really have to noodle around. But that's also where you can sign our petition. The other thing I would love is for people to put our yard signs out. So the yard signs are a way for the politicians and for everyone to know we're watching. We know what's going on and we don't like it. We want to, so our yard sign says either save our seas or keep it wild. And the politicians now know that these are the Green Oceans yard signs. And I think it's great when everyone puts one up because they realize the word is spreading. It's becoming a movement, as Arlo Guthrie would say about Alice's restaurant. It's more than two. It's becoming a movement. One of my favorite songs.
How do you get signs?
Bill's our sign man.
Just go to the website and request signs and we'll send them to you.
Okay, thank you.
Or someone will drive over. And where do you live?
Charlestown.
Oh yeah.
We'll
We've
send
had
them
some-
to you.
So yeah, we'd love everyone who's listening if they're they're worried about Cox's Ledge or this, sign the petition, request websites or yard signs. I mean, we're also always looking for money to support our legal efforts, but that wasn't the purpose of this talk by any means.
Thank you very much. Wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank
Okay,
you.
I'll sign off.